helpful. Well, because I think as a collective ethos in our country, it's, as you noted, like grief is for 24 hours. And if you're not over it in 24 hours, you can't adapt, right? Or
you're not normal.
Right, that there's an issue. And so we have this issue with expressing vulnerability and emotion, like just in general. And so I think, you know, like I said, it can be based off of family makeup. It can be based off of gender stereotypes, a plethora of things. We may just say, I don't do emotions, or whatever that may mean. And I think when people say they don't do emotions, it's that they don't express them in the ways that are deemed normal, whatever that might be, or that they're not comfortable with it, right? And so how do we explore that? How do we dive in, and how do we begin to just lean in to allow emotions to be named, expressed? When we don't express our emotions, they build up. And like you said, sometimes they come out in ways that you're like, oh, that was much more intense than I was expecting. Or that's actually, I didn't realize I was feeling that. I thought it was this, but clearly something's going on over here. How can we begin to, one, encourage each other? I think modeling comes into play. How can we model over Zoom, as you noted, or how can we model when we're not together? Ways to actually process and begin expressing emotion when our society says there's only a few that are allowed, and only at these times and in these capacities.
Right. So I mean, just a couple responses to that, and I'm going to start really big and hopefully titrate down really small here. So the really cool thing about emotions is that without them, we don't remember well. So when we have an emotional experience, those memories actually kind of get tagged in our brains as more important. So an emotional memory is a memory that lasts longer. It's a memory that's easier to recall, and it's a memory that's more vivid. And so when we lose that capacity to feel what we are experiencing, we actually lose what we experience over time, because those memories aren't as important, those stories aren't as important. And to your point, to some extent, is that if we have one of those kind of volcanic eruptions of emotional experience, that gets tagged really heavily. And if it feels unsafe, then the memories we have around emotions are that emotions are unsafe. Because that's what gets recalled the next time an emotion comes up. Is that, oh, this is unsafe and I need to blunt it, or I need to mute the feeling, or something unsafe is going to happen again. And so over time, I think culturally, and I think different cultures experience emotions differently. Different genders have certain kinds of acceptances when it comes to outside perceptions of emotions rather than internal things, because internally we all have the same capacities to experience an emotional life as we go from event to event or experience to experience. Built into our brains, this God-given amalgamation of neurons and transmitters and all that stuff that's up there that makes us who we are, is the capacity to feel. You know, just going back to those simple four words, the capacity to be mad, the capacity to be glad, the capacity to feel sadness, the capacity to feel afraid. and at the same time, there is a great deal of skepticism because emotions are so powerful as to how they skew our perceptions of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we talked a bit about that with fear, how it privileges certain responses to the environment
Mm-hmm.
around us. And the same thing for being angry. It privileges a certain response, a violent response, a righteous response, a response for more justice. And all along that spectrum are different kinds of behaviors and different kinds of reactions. Um, and so what becomes important to me, and the genesis of our conversation in many ways was work that I did with men many years ago, around something we termed at that time alexithymia, which I think can be extended far beyond men, but it's just Latin for not lexa, words, thymia, feelings. No words for feelings. And it really is, more than anything else, a taught deficit. We teach people not to say what they're feeling. We don't teach the words of expression for what they have, and so we don't have a great deal of a vocabulary around what it is we feel, or what it is that we are experiencing beyond the content description. I can describe to you what we did or what we talked about, but I can't describe to you how it felt to talk about those things or do them. And there's a great difference. So when we had our one little tiny summer vacation this year, which was a couple of days up in Grand Lake, Colorado, which is a place that we love to go and hike. And the only reason why we were comfortable going is we were the first person staying in the house after it being shuttered for 2 months. So we knew it was clean. We didn't have to take a carload of wipes to make sure, and Clorox to make sure it was all going to be safe for us. But one of the things we did on that hike was there's an abandoned fire station on the top of one of the mountains outside of Grand Lake, and it's about 5.5 miles in and 5.5 back, with about a 1,000-foot elevation gain. And we didn't know what kind of hike we were going to get on and what we were going to do. And we had an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old with us who were coming along, and both of them made it up. We grumbled along the way, and we grumbled openly along the way that, we could see it off in the distance, and we're like, no, that's not where we're going. That's just too doggone far for us to go there. And my feet hurt, so we had to find creative solutions to distractions from pain. And to keep encouragement around rather than seeing something that's so far off and being discouraged about that. And we went up and we came down, and the way that we tell the story is not, okay, so you walk about a mile flat along the river, and then you have about a 600-foot elevation gain that takes you to the top of the mountain, and you walk the ridge around the mountain, and you walk the valley, and then you walk the ridge to the other mountain, and then you're there, and then you come home. That's a great fact-based explanation of the 11 miles that we spent as a family trying to figure out how to get there and back and be a family still. And so one of the ways and one of the reasons why this was an important story for us for that time is how proud our kids were and how proud we were of our kids, and being able to express our excitement together and our sense and feeling of accomplishment for doing something that we didn't think we could do, and going that far, having this being our second hike of the trip. and just how proud we were of them and being able to express that to them, that, you know, we are so excited and so happy and so proud of you for making it up there and back, and making it up there better than I did in some ways. I probably grumbled the most of anybody, because my knees and heels don't work as well as they did when they were 8 and 12 years old. But that idea and that sense of accomplishment and that story is meaningful, not because we did it, but because we felt it.
Yeah.
We felt what it was like to experience. We felt what it was like to push ourselves,
Yeah.
and to do something new and to do something different. And it's a family story that we share now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a, here's this hike and here's what you're going to do. Here's this hike and here's why it was meaningful to us.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, our kids tell it because, you know, we had fun creating little candy surprises for them when they got tired so that they could be, you know, distracted. We created the Skittle Burst, which is, you know, you take a bunch of Skittles and
Oh,
stuff it into a starburst, and then you stuff it in your mouth and see what flavors you experience.
okay.
So, you know, all sorts of little things that we're going to remember from that, not because we did it, but because we were emotionally available to what was
Mm-hmm.
going on in the story. You know,
Yeah.
I'm completely aware of my frustration when you know, when the 8-year-old wanted to stop and not go any further, and my elation when she decided to continue and she was the first one up the mountain. You know,
Yeah.
all of those little things make that story real and
Yeah.
make it richer and make it more
Mm-hmm.
memorable,
Yeah.
because we chose to feel it rather than just do it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in thinking about emotions and in thinking about vulnerability, and Brene Brown is one of my patron
Mm-hmm.
saints, of course, and a lot of her research is on, you know, true strength lying in our capacity to be vulnerable with one another.
Right.
And feelings are that big frontier of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
The moments that we're embarrassed, the moments that we can come back and say, I didn't do that right. The moments that we can say, you know, this is upsetting me and
Mm-hmm.
I'm angry and here's why. And not
Mm-hmm.
use that as a reason to separate us in relationship, but use it as a reason to really validly connect us to another person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad that you chose this. I'm disappointed that this is what, you know, we could or couldn't do this time.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, being able to name that, I think, you know, again, going back to permission giving, it gives permission
Mm-hmm.
for other people to name it for themselves as well.
Yeah.
Just because you name an emotion doesn't mean you're stuck there.
Right.
Doesn't mean that's the only thing you're going to feel in that moment.
Yeah.
What all it does is acknowledge that there's more in the room than the facts of what's around us.
Mm-hmm.
And in
Mm-hmm.
doing so creates the potential for a richer and more complex story.
Mm-hmm.
That we kind of all deal with those emotions that are around us, and and freeing us hopefully to enjoy the space a bit more. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this is the, you know, the last thing I'll kind of say here. You know, it's been a curiosity to me that um, when we went to Zoom, a lot of my Zoom calls became really, really serious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my hypothesis around that was that we always call them meetings. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
default thing is this is a Zoom meeting, and meetings are business things, and business things are serious.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've taken to renaming all of the Zoom appointments that I have to Zoom conversations or Zoom calls,
Mm-hmm.
because call and a conversation is something entirely different, and it gives us permission to laugh, and
Yeah.
it gives us permission to be present as people rather than to be present as business.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
And so, my curiosity is that if we can change the words and we can change and give permission for new and exciting kinds of words and experiences of things to be a part of our stories, the possibility of really increasing our connection to one another, regardless of whether we're in person or virtual. But more so, increasing our ability to remember our lives with a richer tapestry of what really happened around us. And again, when we hear other people say it, it gives us permission to add those words to our vocabulary. So I don't just have to be mad. I can be frustrated, or I can be peeved, or I can be outraged, or I can be flustered. And all of those are gradations of just being upset and mad. And then we get a richer experience of what it is, and we understand when we really are elevated and offended by something, or when something's just kind of a minor annoyance.
Yeah.
And we get a better chance of parsing through our lives really meaningfully what an experience is, and hopefully responding better to what's going on around us, rather than only reacting and only having one or two words for things.
And it makes me think, as you were talking, we will clearly, as a society, as a world, because it's a pandemic of global proportions, remember 2020. And there will be emotional memories. I think by being able to practice naming throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, as it continues, months, plural, our various emotions, we will be able to actually see the variety and complexity of emotions that tie to this time, rather than wanting to almost numb ourselves through it so that we can get to the other side. Knowing that there really isn't going to be a numbing through it, we will remember, we may just only remember the really difficult pieces of it.
Right.
And is that how we want to engage the experience? And are there other ways to engage it? Not making it rainbows and butterflies, or whatever your version of that might be, but to say, I am experiencing so many things. I need to practice naming what I feel so that I don't look back on this year and just say it took over.
Right.
And that is a skill that we will need post-pandemic beyond. Because we need it now. We needed it before. And that just may be, as you said, when difficulty opens creativity, it might even be a creativity around how we practice actually knowing who we are and what we're feeling. And that is something that I think, not to sound too nostalgic, not to sound too nostalgic, is what can change our world for the better.
Yeah.
And if we can actually model and allow folks to be present. Your daughter coming in reminds me that Ian often says on his Zoom meetings, which are meetings, those aren't as enjoyable. But he goes, we're all the BBC dad, right? Remember the BBC dad was being interviewed and his daughter so like proudly walked in and was like, I found daddy. And then mom comes in and is like, no.
Yep.
And, you know, I'm sure on this recording, you're going to hear my dogs in the background, my kid in the background.
Yep.
All
I've heard the
various
toilet flush
things.
several times in my background, probably.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those where you're just like, right. And we allow people, and to use your term, as you said earlier, the grace to be human, the grace to be present. And I think one of the things we can do is allow the grace to acknowledge that we may actually be fearful, that we may be hopeful, that we may feel a variety of things on any given day, even if it feels like another Groundhog Day,
Mhm.
and be able to invite others to express that as well. Knowing that the desire for things to be normal really is just a sense to know how to cope and how to get
Yeah.
through. And we're being invited to explore a new way of processing and engaging and living.
Yeah.
And I appreciate so very much all the ways that you've brought to light the way emotions are engaged, as well as how we can mark time and mark ritual, and how we can be present and model for each other, even digitally,
Yeah.
and acknowledging that this time allows for newness, and we can embrace that newness, we can push against it, we can simply acknowledge it, um, and that we can do all of those in any given situation. It doesn't have to be a linear process. Very few things in life are linear. And so I really am just grateful for your time and engaging in this conversation as we strive to figure it out, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, if folks are looking for opportunities to control, um, we have the opportunity to tell our stories and control what we put into our stories.
Mhm.
We can tell things simply. We can tell things with complexity. Um, we can tell things with feeling. We can tell things with fact. We can,
Mhm.
and you know, but while it's hard to make event-based plans right now, what we can do is plan to be present and plan to be
Mhm.
vulnerable, and then see what
Mhm.
happens.
Mm. Well, I think that's a great way to end. So I am just going to thank you again for your
Yes,
time and your wisdom, and simply being present and allowing us to explore these conversations. So thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate it.
thank you.